Hello and welcome along. So today we're going to talk about the Dropsite Massacre, and in particular the tactics of the Loyalists, how those tactics influenced the course of the battle, but also what could they have done differently? Did they make the best choices? Could a different commander have got a different result? So let's get into it. So, of course, the Dropsite Massacre is one of the greatest disasters in the Imperium's history. Not just because of Horus's betrayal, but because of the sheer number of Loyalist Astartes that died there. And in fact, the casualty rate of Astartes dying per hour would have been beyond any other battle, perhaps out of any battle ever fought by the Imperium. And indeed, overall, the number of Astarte casualties, because of course there were Astartes on both sides, would have been extremely high and beyond almost any other battle in Imperial history. So, to set the scene for the battle, obviously it occurred because the Loyalists' elements within the Imperium had heard about what had happened at Isstvan III, or at least to some extent. So, Malcador and Dawn, back on Terra, had been informed by the small group of survivors who had escaped on the Eisenstein from the Battle of Isstvan III that Horus had become a traitor and the general events that had occurred there. Eventually, they were convinced enough, at least, that this had happened for Dawn to send an investigation force of Imperial Fists. It was quite a large reconnaissance in force. Now, at roughly the same time, Horus had sent Fulgrim to go and either turn or kill Ferrus, his closest friend amongst the Primarchs. And of course, to do this, Fulgrim had to reveal that he had become a traitor, as had Horus, to Ferrus. And when Ferrus refused to turn, he, of course, then also knew about the heresy. And he would have been one of the earliest people to find this out. Now, because Fulgrim failed to turn him and couldn't bring himself to kill him, even though he did have the opportunity, and then fled back to Isstvan, Ferrus was in the position to act first. So he takes it upon himself to pursue Fulgrim back to the Isstvan system, where he will find Horus and any other traitors, and he will destroy them. Now, it's not entirely clear how the coordination between Ferrus and Dawn and the other Primarchs, who are either loyalist or supposedly loyalist at this point, happens, but it is coordinated through astropaths. The idea is that the Imperial Fists force that was sent out by Dawn to investigate these claims by the survivors of Isstvan III will meet up with Ferrus Manus's Iron Hands and 6 other legions, who will all arrive around the same time at Isstvan and then annihilate the traitors in one almighty show of force that will not only stop the rebellion before it can even get started, but will demonstrate to everybody else that this is what happens when you betray the Emperor. So, of course, it would be very unlikely that, however well coordinated, that all 8 forces would arrive at the Isstvan system at exactly the same time. And, of course, they don't, although they do actually arrive generally quite close to each other. And this is actually part of the plans of the ruinous powers of Chaos Gods, because, of course, they have influence over how easy it is to travel through the warp. They allow the astropathic messages between these forces to move at the speed that is convenient to them, and then they allow the fleets of these forces to move at the speed that is convenient to them. So the Imperial Fist force that was sent out first doesn't actually arrive at Isstvan and is becalmed in the warp, and they have a different story. So that brings it down to the 7 legions that will eventually arrive at Isstvan. And they are allowed to arrive at roughly the same time because this suits the plans of the traitors. Now, the Loyalists, of course, don't know this. They don't have any real knowledge or understanding of the involvement of chaos or the warp in this rebellion. So as far as they're concerned, they're just going to fight a conventional enemy in Horus who has got too big for his boots and thinks he should be the Emperor. Perhaps he's gone mad. Perhaps he's under the influence of some aliens. They don't entirely know, but they aren't thinking, well, this is all a big trap orchestrated by these beings that have power over the warp. So the fact that they have allowed us to get there all at the same time is probably part of a trap. They don't think about that, and of course, that's fair. So the 7 legions that do get there, of course, famously 4 of them are already traitors, and that means that the 3 that arrive first, conveniently, are in a position where if they attack immediately, they will end up being surrounded by the 4 traitor legions already on Isstvan 5, fortified, ready to meet them, and the slightly later arriving 4 legions that are secret traitors who can then trap them and annihilate them. So again, those first 3 legions to arrive, Raven Guard, Salamanders, and a contingent of the Iron Hands led by Ferrus Manus, not the entirety of the Iron Hands Legion, are in a position where they could attack straight away just before the others arrive. But because the Chaos Gods make that happen, they allow those 3 forces to arrive first, seemingly knowing that Ferrus, as the commander of this force, will immediately attack. And so this will put the plan into the perfect situation. They can be sandwiched between the 2 traitor forces and annihilated. So when Ferrus arrives at Isfahan and he is able to survey the situation, he can see that the traitors are dug in on Isfahan 5, so he knows that's the planet he has to attack. He can see from orbit roughly the sort of disposition of the enemy forces. He knows they're building considerable fortifications. He thinks he's kind of caught them slightly early, and that makes sense to him because I found out about this. Dawn and Malcador found out about this by the survivors of Isfahan 3. So we're kind of acting before Horus is truly ready. So I can catch them unawares because they're down there still trying to prepare their positions. He also finds that the traitor fleet isn't there. So all of the traitor ships have been sent somewhere, and he assumes that this is because the traitors don't expect to be attacked so quickly, so they've sent their fleet off to gather resources and so on. So he thinks, again, okay, I've got this opportunity, this golden opportunity. The fleet's not there. They're building their fortifications, but they're not quite ready for me. If I strike now with the forces I have at my disposal, I can annihilate them before they get a chance to dig in further or bring their fleet back to have a large naval engagement. And that's his reasoning for striking straight away. But really, is that a well-reasoned strategy? Because as far as he's concerned, very soon there's going to be 7 legions in orbit around Isfahan 5 with almost the entireties of their fleets. That combined fleet strength will be absolutely enormous and way beyond the capability of the traitor fleet, which is just 4 legions combined fleets. So his combined fleet doesn't really need to fear the arrival of the traitors' combined fleet and can just wait there to annihilate them should they turn up. And if they don't turn up, well, they've got free reign to just bombard Isfahan 5. Now, it is fair to say that the traitors have built their fortress system in a way that means that they are practically invulnerable to an orbital bombardment. So they have dug deep bunker systems. They've installed anti-ship torpedoes, ground-launched torpedoes. So Fulgrim was given the responsibility by Horus to do this, a job that he didn't particularly like the idea of doing because he thought it was too menial, but one he did very well because he is exceptionally talented. This proves to be essentially bombardment proof. So one of the first things the Loyalist fleet do when they arrive is try to bombard these traitor positions, and that doesn't do much damage to them. And this forces the Hand to make a ground assault. But really, Ferrus Manus wanted to make a ground assault anyway, and so it kind of is a 6 of one, half dozen of the other. He probably would have wanted an excuse for a ground assault, regardless of how well the orbital bombardment went, because he really wants to just kill Fulgrim in hand-to-hand combat. He wants to see his face as he executes him for the outrageous slur of thinking that Ferrus Manus, would turn against the Emperor. So either way, a ground assault is going to happen. Now, at this point, if we pause, this would have been the situation for any of the Loyalist Primarchs had they been in charge instead of Ferrus. They would have had 3 Loyalist legions and their fleets in orbit over Isfahan 5, 4 traitor legions, but who had been quite badly mauled at Isfahan 3 already, and so not so roughly equal in capabilities to the Loyalists in orbit, and there would have been no traitor fleet in orbit. So they would have been in the same position as Manus and had that same decision to make. Do I attack now with what I've got and try and catch them off guard, or do I wait a little bit longer for the rest of the Iron Hands to turn up and the 4 other supposedly Loyalist legions? Now, Ferrus doesn't have any reason to doubt that the other legions are still loyal, and nor would any other commander in his place. So we're talking about the time span of a few hours, really, before the full force arrives. And yet, Ferrus can't make himself wait that long. So what would happen next? Well, of course, Ferrus orders the ground assault. They land in drop pods and gunships. they land very close to the traitor line, so they're almost directly on top of them, and they immediately go straight into combat. They effectively launch a heavy infantry attack as their other heavier equipment, like tanks and so on, is being landed and starts to support them. And really, Ferrus is not holding back for anything. He just wants to drive straight up the middle and kill Fulgrim and as many Emperor's children as possible. And in fact, the Iron Hands Legion has this similar feeling of betrayal against the Emperor's children because they were quite close. They built up quite a lot of brotherly bond. The comradeship between those two legions was quite high because they worked together so much, and their Primarchs were such good friends. They had that had bled over into the legions as a whole. And so they all felt kind of personally betrayed by the fact that the Emperor's children had turned traitor against the Emperor, which is something that most of them couldn't even imagine. And so they were fueled by this rage, this betrayal, and they just followed Ferrus straight up the middle into this direct assault on these fortified positions that the Emperor's children were holding. And because the Raven Guard and the Salamanders were accompanying them, they kind of had to go along with it because they couldn't just let them go and die, just run up the middle and be overwhelmed by the defenders. So they advanced with them. So the Salamanders on the left flank and the Raven Guard on the right flank. And so you had this wave of heavy infantry just driving up towards this fortified line. And the defenders, also not making the best decisions, decide that they're going to come out to fight them. And they do kind of move out of their fortifications somewhat, the trench systems, to engage the Loyalists. And so it's very bitter, close hand-to-hand fighting because both sides just want to kill the other. It's less about winning and more about just punishing the opposition for their wrong beliefs. And this degrades into a brawl, essentially. And you have the World Eaters and Sons of Horus facing off against the Raven Guard, and you have the Death Guard facing off against the Salamanders. And eventually it kind of almost becomes somewhat of a stalemate as they just kill and kill and kill each other, but neither side being able to make ground until eventually the supposed Loyalists' reinforcements arrive. This is a few hours later. So you can see it's not that long. Ferrus could have easily waited in orbit for them to arrive for a few hours and then attacked with all of his strength, but he cannot wait. And so now they've arrived, they start to land and start to fortify the landing zone. Ferrus still will not change his tactics. He still has to drive up the middle. He still has to try and fight his way towards where he believes Fulgrim is and try and kill him. Now, Vulcan and Corax are both more reasonable than Ferrus and are able to see, oh, okay, our reinforcements have arrived. They're fortifying the landing position. We're exhausted here. We're just slowly destroying our own legions. And yes, we are killing a lot of the traitors, and that's great, but we're also dying, and we're just going to end up with complete annihilation of all of our legions here, and it's kind of pointless when we've got these reinforcements behind us. We should start to withdraw back to this line and let them take over, because that's the point of the second wave in Ferrus's plan, was that the second wave we could then relieve the first wave. So they start to do this, but Ferrus won't allow the Iron Warriors to retreat. So they stay there, and eventually, of course, famously, he is killed, and the Iron Warriors that are on Span 5 are mostly annihilated. Now, at this point, of course, it's where the other traitors reveal themselves as traitors. So now the 4 legions have landed, or mostly landed, and they see the Raven Guard and the Salamanders coming back towards them, and they open fire on them. This, of course, essentially ends any chance of the Loyalists having any kind of victory. They're completely overwhelmed, completely surprised, and so outnumbered that it's impossible for them to have any kind of victory at this point. It wouldn't matter whoever that was. It could be the Emperor himself leading the 3 Loyalist legions. They haven't got a chance of winning it here. They're outnumbered so much and in such a bad position, being directly between the two forces, the 2 enemy forces, that they stand no chance. And almost all of the Astartes caught in this trap are going to die. So let's reverse things back up to orbit. We're in orbit over Isfahan 5. We have arrived. We're Ferrus Manus. Does he make the right decision to attack? Well, no, obviously. But is that just hindsight? He loses, but he loses mainly because the other 4 legions are actually secretly traitors. So no matter what tactics he uses, no matter what Primarch was there instead of him, the Loyalist 3 legions were going to be defeated. Now, it's possible, and in fact probably likely, that a different Primarch could have led to less Astartes being killed, less Loyalists at least being killed, and perhaps more of the traitors being killed, making it harder for the traitors to carry on their plan. Potentially, that could be true. But even if you imagine a scenario where the 3 Loyalist legions present were in fact the Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and the Ultramarines, even then, with much larger numbers, arguably better commanders in the Lion, Sanguinius, and Guilliman, even then, the sheer numbers stacked against them and the nature of that betrayal of not knowing until the last minute that you're actually being outflanked by the enemy and you're caught in an ambush by the traitors, it's inevitable that they would have lost. They almost certainly would have taken a lot more of the traitors with them, but they still would have lost. But if instead we look at Ferrus's tactics based on the situation he thought he was in, where he had the 7 Loyalist legions in his mind, did he then create the best plan to win this engagement against the traitors? And if not, what could he have done differently? So the first thing Ferrus does after he launches the unsuccessful orbital bombardment is to decide, well, I've got to make a ground assault and I'm going to do it right now. Does he need to do that? Well, the different fleet strengths were in favour of the Loyalists, at least the presumed Loyalists. So bear in mind, we're now working on the scenario that all 7 legions are Loyalists and will remain Loyalist, which is what Ferrus thought was the situation. So he's got the bigger fleet, a fleet so big that there's no threat from the traitor fleet. And in fact, if the traitor fleet do come back, well, great, we'll just wipe them out. So it doesn't really matter. So he is not forced into an immediate ground assault. He doesn't need to do that. He can wait for all of his forces to assemble and then decide how he's going to go about this attack. So that was his first mistake. Now, secondly, when he attacks, how does he use the legion? He doesn't make any attempt at all to play to the strengths of the forces under his command, which any good general would do. That's why Ferrus Manus is not a good general, despite the fact that everyone seems to think that he is. In the universe, he's not. He uses the Raven Guard, who specialise in small teams, rapid attacks, appearing out of nowhere, retreating rapidly, as heavy infantry. He just lands them, says, just walk into the enemy and fight them to the death. Oh yeah, it's World Eaters and Sons of Horus, you'll be fine. The fact that they actually lasted 3 hours against such a situation is actually credit to them, but they are not suited to that role at all and was a complete waste of the talent that they actually have. That is a very clear mistake that he's made as well. Secondly, how does he use the Salamanders? Well, he uses them in the same way because he only uses troops in one way, which is land, walk forward, kill the enemy. That's it. That's his tactic. So he uses them on the left flank, and now they have to face the Death Guard. The Death Guard are perfect for that role. The Death Guard are basically World War I heavy infantry from the trenches. That's their basis of their way that they fight. This is exactly that kind of fight. Perfect for them. They're also quite a large legion, so they've got decent numbers there. Even though they were depleted by the events of Isfam 3, they still outnumber the quite small Salamanders, because the Salamanders are famously a small legion. So you've got a big disparity in numbers there, and tactically wise, it's just not good use of the Salamanders. Salamanders are very tenacious, ferocious warriors. They are able to take a lot of punishment, and they will do their best, and they do a good job to hold the Death Guard and to damage the Death Guard considerably. But again, it's a waste of their talents. They're technology experts. They're basically a legion of highly skilled tech marines. There's not quite that, but they were created to have this exceptional understanding of technology, and using them like this in just a futile drive into a fortified position is just a pointless waste of resources. You could counter-argue, well, there wasn't really an opportunity for the Salamanders to use that skill, that expert technical knowledge. There wasn't an objective for them to go and take that would require that skill. So they need to fall back on the thing that all legionaries are supposed to be quite good at, which is being a near impregnable infantryman who can just carries a massive amount of firepower, take a lot of punishment, and just take an objective. Yes, that's true, and they can do that, but not when they're outnumbered, well, probably something like 2 to 1. So what would be a better way of deploying his initial forces? assuming that he had the foresight just to wait like 3 or 4 hours for the whole of his forces to assemble. So the first thing is he has the Iron Warriors at his disposal, a very large legion who specialise in siege warfare, led by an excellent commander, Perturabo, who understands siege warfare like no one else. Yeah, even Dawn. And he should have led the direct assault. Ferrus could have simply said, I'm giving you command over the initial ground assault. I want you to go down there, set up your legion in the centre, fortify the landing zone, bring down your heavy weapons, start to bombard them, and then begin your inexorable advance onto the fortress of the enemy, as you've done so many times in the countless engagements that you and the Iron Warriors have fought across the galaxy and successfully won. Start doing that. Then use the other legions to provide support. So first of all, the Raven Guard and the Night Lords, perfect to start launching flanking attacks. So attacking the edges of this fortress zone, it's not all equally well fortified. The centre is mainly the most fortified area. So the advantage of the attacker is that they can land anywhere they want. The defender is already stuck in where they've decided to defend themselves. The attacker can land on the flank, doesn't have to come straight up the middle. So he puts the Night Lords on one flank, Raven Guard on the other, and gets them to start attacking in hit-and-run attacks, start to draw out that strength of the defenders, who are forced to send out units to engage them because they don't want to be outflanked. It doesn't need to be a direct assault. It's just enough to pull the strength from the middle. So they start to send out troops to defend these hit-and-run attacks. That sort of escalates and escalates as more and more are sent out and are killed as they go. Because if you don't send enough troops, they get wiped out because they're overwhelmed by a concentration of numbers at that location. But if you send out too many, your centre's too weak. So the defenders are now in a difficult situation. They're forced into reacting to the attack instead of just sitting there and taking it like they did under Ferrus's plan. And now the Iron Warriors begin their assault. They've softened up the enemy with heavy weapons bombardments, etc. They're driving up the middle, but they need some support in that, of course. So this is where the Salamanders and the Word Bearers come in. They fortify the left flank of that forward advance. So they're taking the place of where the Salamanders were in Ferrus's plan. So now you've got the combined forces of those two legions. The Salamanders, obviously, we know, as we've discussed, were quite a small legion. And the Word Bearers, although a large legion, didn't have their entire forces present. So combining them together would give you a decent legion-sized force to face off against the Death Guard. Would, in fact, outnumber the depleted Death Guard considerably. Also, in this scenario, depleted further by being attacked completely in the flank and the rear by raiding parties from the Night Lords. So they're now in a very difficult situation, suddenly facing this attack from these two combined legions. And of course, they've been under considerable bombardment for several hours, maybe even beyond that. Maybe we can make the siege last a bit longer. We can go into days from the Iron Warriors. It doesn't really matter because we're in control of the situation. We're in control of the clock here. We have complete control of space around this Zone 5 because we've got a massive fleet and they don't have a fleet present. And if, as I've said, their fleet turns up, well, it's much smaller than ours. We just destroy it. So we attack on our terms when they're starting to show weakness. And on the other side of the main line, we use the Alpha Legion. Now, a very large legion. Now, yes, the Alpha Legion's main tactic is infiltration, etc., but they did do very well in large-scale battles as well because they had huge numbers and they were very effective individual soldiers. Very disciplined, very well organized, highly skilled in both weapons and tactics. So extremely capable of performing this role of taking over the Raven Guard's position on that right-hand side of the main advance, allowing the Raven Guard to be the equivalent of the Night Lords on the other flank and drawing the enemy out. So now your World Eaters, who in no way are they going to be able to stand and just watch the raids of the Raven Guard, they're going to be drawn out and wiped out in small engagements across that flank. And now when the main assault begins, they're faced with a huge number of Alpha Legion because the Alpha Legion were also very large legion and would considerably outnumber the depleted World Eaters facing them, who were supported by some Sons of Horus as well. But again, they'd also were heavily depleted. They would have also been more depleted by the Iron Warriors' bombardment and further depleted by the raids from the Raven Guard. Now you've got this enemy traitor line slowly disintegrating as it's drawn out to the flanks, but bombarded and broken down and facing this massive assault from 2 very large legions and 2 combined legions on the other side driving towards them. They don't stand a chance. They're wiped out. And to deliver the final coup de grace, the Iron Hands, with Ferrus to lead them, have been held in reserve, waiting for any potential problems that come up with the plan. They can reinforce that position on the battlefield. But if nothing happens, they've got their full force waiting for an orbital drop to strike straight at the heart of the enemy as they start to break, decapitating the head, killing Horus and Fulgrim, and winning the battle. Ferrus gets to take out his rage on them, and the Iron Warriors have a key role in the victory, etc. So everyone's happy. Now that is how he could have done it. Had the Loyalists all been Loyalists and not fake Loyalists. There you go. But he doesn't even try and do that. No. Doesn't use any of his legions to their strengths. He just turns up and decides, everybody attack. That is not a good general. That's my opinion on Ferrus's tactics and the tactics in general of the Loyalists at Isstvan 5. What they could have done potentially, at least planned to do. I know they couldn't have done that because there, in fact, were traitors amongst them, but they could have planned to do that because that would have actually worked. Whereas his plan was seemingly, well, we're going to attack as soon as possible and we'll probably kill them all. If we don't, well, you can join in later and just follow us. Okay, great plan. There we go. Anyway, so tell me what you think. Is my plan terrible? Bear in mind, that is the plan, which would include 7 Loyalist legions. I appreciate it wouldn't work given the actual circumstances. So please just don't tell me your plan's not going to work because the traitors were still traitors. I know that. As I said, no one could win that battle under those circumstances. But at least Ferrus could have created a plan under the circumstances he thought he was in to have won it. So as always, please comment, like, subscribe, share, and all that stuff. And I will see you next time.